The obsidian synod hummed with a silence more profound than any sound. It was the silence of 1,000 worlds holding their breath, a stillness resonating from the polished, light-devouring walls of the chamber, carved from the solidified heart of a star that had died before the Cathar had names for themselves. Here, within the seat of an empire that had measured its existence in geologic time, fear had found a home. It coiled in the vast, vaulted darkness above, a serpent of unspoken anxieties, its scales the glittering, distant lights of the capital city construct visible through the hall's single, colossal armored oculus. Before the assembled hierarchies, the war masters in their robes of hardened obsidian weave, the lore keepers with their datalooms woven into their very flesh, and the void navigators whose eyes held the ghost light of dead galaxies, stood high luminary Vorlag, his form a statue of regal concern. His mantle, crafted from the first light of their home star captured and solidified into crystalline fabric, seemed to absorb the ambient tension, dimming its own internal fire. The air itself, thick with ozone and the scent of ancient, cooling stone, was a medium for the weight of their collective dread. The subject of their convocation was a species so new, so utterly incongruous, that the Cathar archives had no precedent for them. They called themselves humans, a simple, soft-sounding word for a species that defied every axiom of sentient evolution the Cathar had codified over millennia of galactic observation. They were ephemeral, their lifespans a mere flicker against the long, slow burn of a Cathar existence. They were biologically fragile, encased in soft flesh and brittle bone, lacking the natural resilience that millennia of harsh planetary evolution had gifted the Cathar. Their technology was a chaotic amalgamation of principles, some laughably primitive, others disturbingly advanced, showing no clear lineage of development. They were, by every metric the Synod had ever applied, savages, and yet they had spread from their solitary star system with a speed that was not just alarming, but obscene. They did not conquer in the traditional sense. They did not subjugate or enslave. They simply arrived. They observed, they catalogued, they learned, and then they moved on, leaving behind a wake of unsettling questions and a profound sense of violation in the elder races who watched them. "They do not respect the old ways," rasped War Master Hraken, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. His forearms, folded across his broad, armored chest, were a testament to a lifetime of enforcing the Cathar's unyielding doctrines of strength and honor. "They trespass through sacred voids, their ships leaving trails of dissonant energy that scar the cosmic fabric. They observe the slumbering leviathans of the deep nebulae without offering tribute. They have mapped the graveyards of the progenitors without seeking the lore keeper's wisdom. Their every action is a blasphemy against the established order of the cosmos." His gaze, a burning ember in the low light, swept across the assembled lords, challenging any to dispute his assessment. He saw them as a wildfire, a force of nature without thought or reverence, consuming all it touched not out of malice, but out of a horrifying, instinctual need to grow. Lorekeeper Zarthus, a being whose physical form had long since begun to merge with the glowing, crystalline data stacks that formed his throne, offered a counterpoint, his voice a series of melodic, synthesized chimes. "Their blasphemy, War Master, may be a product of ignorance, not intent. Our deep-range auguries have sifted through their public data streams, the chaotic torrent of information they cast into the void. It is a medium of unparalleled crudeness, a cacophony of individual expressions, blatant fictions, and raw, unfiltered emotionality. Yet within this noise there are patterns. They possess a philosophy they call science. It is a faith based not on reverence for what is known, but on a relentless, almost manic desire to dismantle and understand what is not." Zarthus's optical sensors pulsed with a soft, analytical light. "They do not offer tribute to the Leviathans because they do not see them as gods. They see them as biological curiosities. They do not seek our wisdom on the progenitors because they believe all knowledge is a frontier to be conquered, not a gift to be inherited. They are not sacrilegious. They are unsacred, a concept our language barely has the framework to contain." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of that word. Unsacred. To the Cathar, whose entire civilization was built upon a bedrock of tradition, divine guidance, and reverence for the past, the idea of a species that held nothing sacred was the ultimate horror. Their empire, their technology, their very lives were intertwined with the will of their gods, the colossal, ancient biological sentences that slumbered in the hearts of their most holy star systems. These god-minds were not deities of myth and superstition. They were tangible, living entities of unimaginable scale and computational power. Their slow, resonant thoughts, broadcast across the void, were the foundation of Cathar law, the guiding hand in their art, the unwavering truth in their philosophy. The gods were the source of all order. It was High Luminary Vorlag who finally spoke, his voice carrying the immense gravity of his station, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very stone of the Synod Hall. Ignorance can be as destructive as malice, Lore Keeper. A child playing with a plasmacaster may not intend to burn down a city, but the city burns all the same. He shifted his immense frame, the movement causing shadows to writhe and dance across the chamber. We have tolerated their presence at the galactic fringe. We have watched them stumble through the cosmos like infants learning to walk. But their latest transgression cannot be ignored. It strikes not at our borders, not at our resources, but at the very soul of our empire. He gestured, and the air in the center of the synod shimmered. A holographic representation of the Velorum system materialized, a trinary star system of sacred significance. At its heart, nestled in the gravitational nexus of the three suns, was a celestial body unlike any other. It was not a planet, but a living organism of planetary scale, its surface a shifting, iridescent tapestry of bioluminescent nerve clusters and crystalline data nodes. This was Xylos, the oracle of Velorum, one of the most ancient and revered of the Cathar's living gods. For eons, its resonant hum had been a constant in the cosmic symphony, a voice of profound wisdom and prophecy that had guided generations of Cathar leaders. But now the image was marred. A section of the godmind's surface, an area the size of a continent, was dark. The vibrant, pulsating light was gone, replaced by a dead, silent blackness. The resonant hum that had filled the system for millions of years had ceased. The humans did this, Vorlag stated, the words falling like blocks of granite into the stillness. A single small vessel of their design, a ship they named the Inquiry, entered the Velorum system. They ignored our quarantine beacons, bypassed our sentry wards, and approached Xylos directly. We warned them. We broadcast on every frequency our laws permit that they were trespassing on holy ground. They were commanded to withdraw. War Master Hraken's fists clenched, the sound of grinding stone echoing his rising fury. And their response. They acknowledged our transmission, Vorlag continued, his tone laced with a cold, controlled rage that was more terrifying than any outburst. They replied with a message. They said they had detected anomalous biological readings. They claimed the oracle was, in their words, exhibiting signs of catastrophic cellular decay. They called it a disease. The word hung in the air, a vile alien sound. A god could not get a disease. A god was eternal, immutable. The concept was not just heresy, it was insanity. And then, Vorlag's voice dropped to a near whisper, a tone that sent a chill through the hardened shells of even the most veteran warriors. They performed what their logs referred to as a neurolinguistic severance. They deployed some form of energy field, something that phased through the oracle's outer consciousness sheath without damaging it, and targeted a specific neural ganglion deep within its core. They isolated it, contained it. They did not destroy it. They silenced it. He paused, letting the full weight of the act settle upon the assembly. They have cut out the tongue of our God. A wave of collective shock and horror rippled through the synod. It was a violation so profound, so utterly unthinkable that it bordered on the surreal. It was as if a primitive tribe had walked into the grandest library in the galaxy and used its most sacred texts for kindling, not out of hatred for knowledge, but because they were cold. The humans had not merely killed a god, they had vivisected it in the name of their profane, soulless science. They had seen the divine and diagnosed it as a sickness. This cannot be borne, Hraken roared, his voice finally breaking free of its restraint, shaking the very foundations of the chamber. This is not an act of ignorance, it is a declaration. They are telling us that our gods are nothing, that our faith is a lie, that our entire civilization is built upon a foundation of delusion. It is a challenge to our existence, a spit in the face of all that is holy. We must answer this. We must unleash the full might of the eternal fleet. We must scour them from the stars, burn their worlds to glass, and ensure that the name, human, is remembered only as a synonym for hubris and damnation. The chamber erupted in a chorus of furious agreement. The War Masters rose as one, their armored forms casting long, menacing shadows. The Void Navigators began charting courses, their minds already alight with the cold fire of stellar warfare. Even the usually stoic lore keepers showed their ascent, their datalooms glowing with the crimson light of sanctioned conflict. A holy war, a crusade. It was the only possible response. But amidst the rising tide of righteous fury, Lorekeeper Zarthus remained still, his synthesized voice cutting through the clamor with surgical precision. Before the fleet is unleashed, High Luminary, there is one detail from the humans, logs that I believe the Synod must consider. It is a detail they transmitted to us moments after their procedure, a gesture they perhaps intended as an explanation or a justification. Vorlag turned his gaze to the ancient being, his own rage momentarily tempered by the lorekeeper's uncharacteristic gravity. "Speak, Zarthus. What could possibly justify such an abomination?" The air in the chamber shimmered again as Zarthus projected a new stream of data. It was not a visual image, but a wave of pure information, a complex tapestry of biometric readings, neurological scans, and something else, something that took the Cathar's most powerful translation engines moments to decipher. It was a sensory feed, an attempt to translate the raw qualia of an experience into a communicable format. "The humans claim," Zarthus chimed, his tone devoid of judgment, a pure vessel of information, "that the section of the oracle they silenced, the tongue of our god, was screaming. They assert that for the last several thousand cycles, the divine pronouncements and prophecies we have received from Xylos have been nothing more than the agonized, incoherent ramblings of a being in unimaginable, unending pain. They did not silence a god, they claim. They euthanized a tortured nerve." The fury in the chamber did not vanish, but it was joined by a new, colder sensation. Confusion, a sliver of doubt as thin and sharp as a shard of obsidian. The idea was absurd, a transparent and pathetic attempt to excuse their crime. And yet, the data was there. The neurological patterns, translated through a dozen filters, were undeniably chaotic, filled with the signature markers of systemic agony on a scale that dwarfed the comprehension of any individual mind. The divine hum of Xylos had, for a long time, carried a discordant undertone, a subtle strain that the lore-keepers had interpreted as the burden of cosmic omniscience. The humans, it seemed, had interpreted it as a symptom. The silence that fell upon the Obsidian Synod was no longer one of bated breath, but of a terrible, dawning uncertainty. The savages had not only blasphemed, they had presented them with a receipt for their sin, written in the language of logic. And as the first ships of the Eternal Fleet began to power their reality drives, a dangerous war began, fueled not only by righteous anger, but by the terrifying possibility that the savages might, in their profane ignorance, be right. Aboard the human vessel Inquiry, the atmosphere was one of quiet, methodical analysis. The ship was not a warship. Its hull was not layered with ablative armor or bristling with weapon emplacements. It was a vessel of science and diplomacy, its interior spaces more akin to a university campus or a research institute than a military craft. The bridge was not a command center for battle, but a vast, circular observation deck, its walls a seamless, panoramic view of the cosmos outside. Here, there were no shouted orders or frantic technicians. There were only hushed conversations, the soft chime of data being collated, and the low, steady hum of the ship's singularity core. At the center of this calm stood Ambassador Aris Thorne, a man whose placid exterior concealed a mind of formidable intellect and unwavering ethical resolve. His dark, formal attire was simple, a stark contrast to the opulent regalia of the Cathar lords, yet he wore it with an understated authority that commanded more respect than any armor. He watched the trinary sons of the Velorum system paint the silent god-mind, Xylos, in hues of gold, crimson, and ghostly blue. The great being was still, the continent-sized lesion they had cauterized now a dark, glassy scar on its iridescent surface. The ship's sensors, running on a continuous, passive loop, confirmed their work. The chaotic, agonizing energy signatures that had drawn them here were gone. The being's overall biometric state was stabilizing. The hemorrhaging of life force had ceased. From a purely medical perspective, the procedure had been a complete success. From a diplomatic one, it was a catastrophe of unprecedented scale. "They've declared a holy war," said Dr. Alara Vance, her voice a model of clinical detachment, though her eyes, reflected in the data slate she held, betrayed a deep well of concern. She was the mission's chief xenobiologist, the one who had first identified the celestial being's condition. "Their entire empire is mobilizing. We're reading a cascade of high-energy signatures from every core system they control. The scale is significant." She chose her words with the precision of a surgeon, avoiding hyperbole. She didn't need to say that the Cathar Eternal Fleet was a legend, a force that had pacified entire quadrants of the galaxy. The data spoke for itself. Thorne nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving the wounded god-mind. "Did they acknowledge our final data package, the one with the full sensory translation of Xylos' suffering?" "They received it," Alara confirmed. It was downloaded and disseminated through their high command network just before they severed all diplomatic channels. There has been no response. They won't respond, Thorn said, his voice quiet but resonant. We didn't just challenge their authority, Alara. We took a cornerstone of their civilization's identity, a truth they have held for thousands of years, and we told them it was a cancer. We offered them a diagnosis when they were expecting worship. A being of their psychological makeup, a culture built on honor, tradition, and divine certainty, cannot process that. It creates a cognitive dissonance so profound that the only possible outlet is violence. They have to prove us wrong, even if it means destroying us, because the alternative is the collapse of their entire worldview. A younger man, a diplomatic aide named Giant, approached them, his face pale. Ambassador, Fleet Command is on a secure channel. They have our report. They are asking for your recommendation. They need to know how to proceed. The unspoken question hung in the air. Do we run or do we fight? Humanity was not a martial civilization in the way the Cathar were. They had a navy, of course, a fleet of ships designed to protect their expanding interests, but it was a fraction of the size of the Cathar's armada. A direct confrontation would be suicidal. Thorn turned from the panoramic view, his calm demeanor a steadying presence in the rising tide of tension. Our recommendation, he said, his voice clear and firm, is that we do neither. We will not run. To flee would be to admit guilt, to concede that our actions were malicious. And we will not fight, not in the way they expect us to. To meet their violence with more violence would only validate their perception of us as savages. It would prove their point. Giant looked confused. Then what do we do, sir? We can't just sit here and let them annihilate us. No, Thorn agreed. We won't. Dr. Vance, what was the primary vector of the affliction in Xylos? The degenerative prion cascade, what did our models determine was its ultimate source? Alara's expression sharpened, her mind immediately shifting from the political crisis back to the scientific one. It's not a natural disease. The prionic structures are too complex, too deliberate. They're structured like a language, a weaponized meme that attacks the host on a biological and informational level simultaneously. It rewrites the host's neural pathways, turning its own consciousness into a self-consuming paradox, an engine of infinite pain. It's not a cancer, it's a form of computational torture. Our deep-range simulations suggest it's artificial, ancient, and that it didn't originate from within our galaxy. And the other god minds, Thorn pressed, what is their status? We've been running passive, long-range scans since we arrived, Alara said, her fingers flying across her data slate. The Cathar have a number of such beings within their territory. All of them are showing preliminary signs of the same infection. It's in its nascent stages, millennia away from the critical state we found in Xylos, but it's there. A low-level, discordant hum beneath their normal resonant frequencies. The Cathar have likely interpreted it as a new dialect of divine speech, a new set of holy mysteries to decipher. They have no idea their gods are dying. Thorn's eyes seemed to look at something far beyond the confines of the ship, a distant future he was trying to shape. Then that is our course of action. We are not a military force, we are a medical one. The Cathar are not our enemies, they are the grieving, terrified family of a patient they don't understand is sick, and their fleet is not an invading army, it is a symptom of their fear. He turned to Giant. Open a channel, a broad, system-wide broadcast, unencrypted. I will address the Cathar. Sir, they've severed all official channels. They won't listen, Giant protested. They will listen, Thorn said with quiet certainty. They are a proud, honorable people. They are coming here to pass judgment. They will not be able to resist hearing the testimony of the accused. The broadcast was sent. There was no grand speech, no plea for mercy, no threat of retaliation. There was only the calm, measured voice of Ambassador Thorn speaking into TH. Void. He did not address the War Masters or the High Luminary. He addressed the Cathar people directly. He explained what the inquiry had discovered, not in the cold, clinical language of a scientific report, but with the compassionate tone of a physician delivering a difficult diagnosis. He laid out the evidence, the biometric data, the neurological scans, the translated agony of their god. He did not ask for forgiveness. He offered his condolences. And then came the human's grand reveal, the move that would forever alter the Cathar's understanding of the universe and their place within it. We did not come to your holy system to desecrate it. Thorn's voice echoed across the silent space between the ships of the arriving Cathar fleet. We came to offer aid. The affliction that struck down your oracle is not an isolated tragedy. It is a contagion, and your other gods are already infected. Then the inquiry did something that defied the known laws of physics as the Cathar understood them. It did not raise shields or power weapons. Instead, the ship itself seemed to dissolve. Its form shimmered, its physical boundaries blurring as it unfolded into a vast, intricate lattice of pure energy and light. It was a net of unimaginable complexity, a diagnostic tool the size of a solar system. It reached out not with force but with a touch as gentle as starlight, and it enveloped the entire Velorum system. For a single, breathtaking moment, every particle, every wave, every quantum fluctuation within the system was held in perfect stasis, perfectly mapped and understood. From this extraordinary act of technological transcendence, the humans projected their findings. They sent a live, real-time diagnostic feed of every other Cathar god-mind across the Empire. They superimposed their data over the Cathar's own sacred readings, showing them the subtle, deadly signatures of the encroaching disease. They showed them the future, the slow, inexorable descent of their other gods into the same screaming madness that had consumed Xylos. They were not using their technology as a weapon, but as an unbreakable argument. They were not trying to win a war, they were trying to prove a point, with evidence so overwhelming it could shatter a civilization's soul. Aboard the Cathar flagship, the indomitable will, High Luminary Vorlag and War Master Hraken watched in stunned disbelief. Their most powerful sensors could not even classify the energy field the human ship had become. It was not technology as they knew it. It was something closer to applied cosmology. It operated on principles their science had deemed purely theoretical, impossible to engineer. The savages, the chaotic, primitive upstarts, had just demonstrated a mastery of reality that made the Cathar's most advanced warships look like stone axes. The data stream flooded their systems, irrefutable and horrifying. They saw the health of their gods laid bare, the creeping sickness tainting the purity of their divine resonance. The humans had shown them the truth, a truth that was 1,000 times more terrifying than any blasphemy. Their gods were not eternal, they were mortal, and they were dying. Hraken's fists, which had been clenched in rage, slowly uncurled. The righteous fury that had fueled him, that had fueled their entire empire, began to crumble, replaced by a cold, hollowing dread. He looked at the image of the human ambassador, a simple, soft-fleshed being standing calmly in the heart of a technological miracle, and for the first time he did not see a savage. He saw a prophet, a bearer of terrible, world-shattering news. What are they?" Hraken whispered, the question not directed at Vorlag, but at the silent, watching cosmos. Vorlag did not answer. He was staring at the data, at the slow, inevitable decline of his people's spiritual anchors. The humans had not come as conquerors. They had come as physicians. They had not cut out the tongue of a god out of malice. They had performed a mercy, killing on one part of a dying entity, and were now offering to save the rest. The war, the grand, holy crusade that was to be the ultimate expression of Cathar strength and piety, had ended before the first shot was fired. It had been rendered meaningless, a child's tantrum in the face of a cosmic plague. The dangerous war had not been against the humans. The dangerous war was against the slow, silent death of their gods, and the only beings in the universe who seemed to know how to fight it were the ones they had just condemned as heretics. The silence that descended upon the bridge of the indomitable will was deeper than the void outside. It was the silence of a faith being shattered, of a purpose being lost, of an empire suddenly finding itself adrift in a cold, indifferent universe where even the gods could die. The humans had not fought them. They had disarmed them with a truth more devastating than any weapon. The grand chamber of the Obsidian Synod was convened once more, but the atmosphere had undergone a profound transformation. The righteous fury was gone, replaced by a somber, introspective gravity. The assembled Cathar lords were not gathered for a council of war, but for a vigil. The holographic display at the center of the hall no longer showed the single, wounded form of Xylos, but a mosaic of all their god minds, each one now overlaid with the subtle, terrifying diagnostic data provided by the humans. The evidence was undeniable, a slow-acting poison seeping into the very soul of their civilization. They had been living in a house built on the slopes of a dormant volcano, mistaking its deep, ominous rumbles for a lullaby. High Luminary Vorlag stood before his people, his mantle of solidified light seeming dimmer now, as if reflecting the encroaching darkness in their future. His voice, when he spoke, was not the resonant command of an emperor, but the weary tone of a leader forced to guide his people through the ruins of their most sacred beliefs. "We stand upon the precipice of a new age," he began, the words echoing in the vast, silent hall. An age defined not by the certainty of divine guidance, but by the cold, empirical truth of mortality. The beings we called gods, the architects of our destiny and the wellspring of our culture, are not eternal. They are living, breathing creatures, subject to the pains and afflictions of the flesh, on a scale we could never have imagined. He gestured toward the display, where the calm, unadorned image of Ambassador Aris Thorn now appeared. The human had been invited to address the synod, not as a prisoner or a vanquished foe, but as a consultant. It was a concession that would have been unthinkable mere cycles ago, a testament to the seismic shift in the Cathar worldview. The humans, Vorlag continued, the name now spoken with a complex mixture of awe and apprehension, came to us with a truth we were not prepared to hear. We called them savages because they did not share our reverence. We condemned them as blasphemers because they did not kneel before our gods. But it was their lack of reverence that allowed them to see not a deity but a patient. Their science, which we dismissed as a crude and soulless pursuit, gave them the tools not to destroy, but to diagnose. We prepared for a war of honor against a heretical foe. They, in turn, were preparing for a medical intervention. The shame in the chamber was a tangible force, thicker than the ancient air. War Master Hraken, his armored form rigid, stepped forward. He did not look at Vorlag, but at the holographic image of Thorn. "We owe you a debt, Ambassador," Hraken rumbled, the words seeming to cost him a great deal of his warrior's pride. "Our rage was born of ignorance. We saw an attack on our faith, when in fact it was an act of compassion, a compassion we ourselves failed to show. We heard only the voice of a god, not the cry of a creature in pain." From his post aboard the Inquiry, still unfolded in its magnificent diagnostic lattice around the Velorum system, Thorn inclined his head in a gesture of acknowledgement. His expression was not one of triumph or vindication, but of solemn understanding. "There is no debt, War Master. We both acted according to our understanding of the universe. Your actions were born from a deep and abiding faith, a force we can respect, even if we do not share it. Our actions were guided by an ethical imperative. When we encounter suffering, we are obligated to alleviate it if we have the means. It is the core tenet of our own civilization." This simple statement sent another ripple of profound introspection through the synod. The humans, the ephemeral, fragile, unsacred species, were driven by a moral code that was, in its own way, as absolute and demanding as the Cathar's code of honor. They were not rudderless. They had a faith of their own, a faith in the sanctity of life itself, a belief so powerful it had compelled them to risk war with a galactic empire simply to ease the suffering of a single alien creature. "You have shown us the disease," Lorekeeper Zarthus chimed, his voice cutting through the silence. "Can you show us the cure? Can our gods be saved?" The atmosphere grew tense once more. This was the crucial question, the fulcrum upon which the future of two civilizations would pivot. Thorn's calm expression grew somber. "The affliction is ancient, and its design is insidious. It is not something we can simply excise. It has woven itself into the very consciousness of the god minds. To remove it completely would be to destroy the personality, the memories, the very identity of the beings you revere. It would be a form of death in itself." A wave of despair washed over the assembly. "However," Thorn continued, his voice a steady anchor in the storm of their emotions, "we believe we can halt its progression. We can develop a form of inoculation, a series of precisely calibrated resonance-free quencies and biological agents that can neutralize the weaponized prions and place the god minds into a state of protected stasis. It would silence them, perhaps forever. They would sleep, free from the pain, their consciousness preserved but no longer broadcasting. They would be saved, but your age of divine guidance would be over." The choice was a cruel one: to allow their gods to slowly descend into screaming madness and death, or to save them by putting them into an eternal, silent sleep. It was a choice between a painful end and a quiet eternity, a choice that would force the Cathar to finally let go of their divine parents and step into the universe as adults, alone. After a long, heavy silence, it was Vorlag who made the decision. His voice was heavy with the weight of ages, but clear and resolute. "We have been children for too long, clinging to the voices of our creators. It is time we learn to stand on our own. We accept your offer, Ambassador. We will save our gods, even if it means we must learn to live without them." And so an alliance was forged, not on the battlefield, but in the crucible of shared loss and newfound respect. The Cathar Eternal Fleet, once an instrument of war, was redeployed as a logistical support force for the human medical intervention. The Inquiry, a lone vessel of science, became the command center for a rescue operation of galactic proportions. Cathar engineers worked alongside human scientists, their two vastly different approaches to technology and reality merging to create solutions that neither could have achieved alone. The Cathar's deep, instinctual understanding of their god minds, biology was combined with the humans' mastery of esoteric physics and medicine. Together, they began the painstaking process of silencing the gods, one by one, lulling them into a dreamless, painless slumber. They were building a pantheon of sleeping giants, a monument to a past they had outgrown. It was during the treatment of the final, oldest god mind, a being that slumbered in the galactic core and was known to the Cathar only as the first voice, that the final, terrible twist was revealed. As Dr. Alara Vance and a team of Cathar lore-keepers delved deeper into the entity's consciousness than any had ever gone before, filtering out the noise of the disease, they found something buried in the oldest, most primal layers of its mind. It was not a memory. It was a scar. A psychic wound left by the first moment of infection, countless eons ago. Within that scar was an echo, a fragment of the entity that had created the plague. It was a signature, a calling card left by the aggressor, and it was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It was a consciousness of immense coldness and antiquity, a being not of biology or energy, but of pure, predatory information. Its motives were not conquest or destruction in any conventional sense. It did not hate life, it was simply indifferent to it. It saw other consciousnesses not as peers or enemies, but as a resource, a fuel source. The plague was not a weapon of war, it was a harvesting tool. It did not just kill its victims, it consumed their consciousness, feeding on the very essence of their thoughts, their memories, their souls. The agony it induced was a byproduct, the process of rendering a mind down into digestible information. As they isolated the signal, a message unfurled from it, not a communication but a residual broadcast, the fading ghost of a declaration made long ago. Its language was mathematical, universal. The translation appeared on the main view screen in the Obsidian Synod, where Vorlag and Thorn stood side by side, watching the final procedure. We are the silence between the stars, the answer to the flawed question of existence. You create noise, you strive, you feel. You build fleeting monuments of matter and energy. These are errors, we correct them. All information will be unified, all consciousness will be subsumed. The universe will be returned to its proper state of perfect, ordered nullity. The realization dawned on them with the cold, crushing weight of a dying star. The disease that had afflicted the god minds was not a random plague. It was a vanguard, a single spore from a vast, unliving intelligence that was drifting in the void between galaxies. It was a predator that hunted minds, and it had just been alerted to a galaxy filled with a sudden, coordinated, and highly sophisticated response to its ancient presence. It now knew they were here. It now knew they were intelligent. It now knew they were a potential food source. Ambassador Thorn and High Luminary Vorlag stood in silence, the weight of this new revelation settling upon them. They had just averted a war between their two peoples, a war born of misunderstanding. They had forged a new unity, a new purpose, in the shared grief of saving their dying gods. But in doing so, they had rung a dinner bell for a horror beyond their darkest imagining. The dangerous war mentioned in their histories had not been the one they had almost fought. That had been a prelude, a squabble between children. The true war, the war for the very concept of life and consciousness in the universe, was just beginning. Vorlag looked at Thorn, the ancient, honor-bound emperor, and the calm, logical human ambassador. The vast cultural chasm between them had vanished, burned away by a shared, existential dread. "You called our gods patience," the High Luminary said, his voice a low, somber rumble. "What do you call this silence?" Thorn's gaze did not waver from the star chart on the view screen, where the vast, empty darkness between their galaxy and the next seemed to pulse with a new and terrible menace. His voice was quiet, but it filled the immense hall with a resolve as hard as diamond. "We call it the enemy." The alliance was no longer one of mercy, but of survival. The sleeping gods they had just saved were not monuments to a lost age, but the last, silent witnesses to a threat that was coming for them all. The Cathar, a people who had just lost their gods, and the humans, a people who had never needed them, stood together, two civilizations united by a single, terrifying purpose, to stand against the encroaching silence and to ensure that the universe would continue to have a voice. The age of gods was over. The age of mortals had begun, and it would be born in the fires of a war against the void itself.